And it is my great pleasure to welcome Kelly and Dale to talk about seed collection guides. And with that, I will welcome you to the stage and turn over the stage to you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks to Brandon, Katie, Linda, and everybody who helped make this conference possible. It is a ton of work to do a conference, especially virtually for the first time. So thank you for your many hours. Thanks to our sponsors, and thanks to you for tuning in to this latest Wild Things session. We're going to be looking at the seed collection guides today. This is a resource we put together to help you guys figure out how to identify and collect your seeds. So in here, you will see images of the seeds themselves, but also the seed pods and whatever features of the plant are visible at harvest time, which might literally be a stem and just a seed pod. So whatever's there, Dale photographed it and I wrote about it to help you guys learn how to identify and collect your seeds. So what we want to do with the session today is Dale's going to tell you a bit about the making of these guides. As you can probably already tell, this wasn't him simply skipping into the prairie with a phone. This was hiking around with a backpack full of camera gear and photographs at home to show you all those wonderful up-close details. And then I'm going to take you through these 12 guides so you get a sense of how they're organized, how to find these species. We'll talk through the terms so you understand what I mean when I say it's a ballistic seed, a mama's boy, or a beak, because that's going to tell you how the seed is dispersed, how much time you have to collect it, and sometimes some really critical information on how to process, store, or sow your seeds. And then we want to hear from you guys. What of these species should we look at closely? So at any point during the presentation, you are welcome to type these species into the chat. And that's how we'll spend the second half of the session, as looking at the species that you've always wanted to collect or species you've had challenges with. Just type it in and we'll take a deeper dive into those together. So about myself, I'm Kelly Schultz. I work for Lake County Forest Preserve District. I've been working in restoration ecology for 17 years now. And all of my jobs have included seed collection. A couple of my jobs have also included greenhouses. So if you guys get the chance to germinate seeds, do it. It is just really magical when stuff grows for you. And if it doesn't germinate and you can figure out why, you can learn some really powerful and sometimes painful lessons, such as, oh, that's one of those species that you're supposed to sow fresh, and I've been collecting it for years and letting it dry out, so all of my efforts have actually been wasted. Awesome. So I try to include some of those lessons into the guide so that you guys will have great success with your seedy efforts. So with that, I want to hand it off to my co-author, Dale Schultz, so that he can tell you a bit about the making of the guides.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. I'm going to just try to get my screen up here. And get it working right. Okay, I'm a volunteer at the Lake County Round Savannah Nursery. I've been volunteering here since 2016, and then I've been volunteering for a longer time in various restoration groups in Cook and Lake County. I'm a retired chemical engineer, and I have a photography hobby that I'd like to try. I'd like to try to get involved in my volunteering work. And so when I started volunteering at the Native Seed Nursery, one of the main things we did was a lot of seed collection, collecting seeds to in the nursery for distribution in our restorations in Lake County, and also going around the county and collecting seed to bring to the nursery and propagate. Usually when we did this, it'd be somebody like Kelly leading us who could tell us what to pick and what it looks like if it's ripe or not. And sometimes we would go off individually and try to identify the plants to pick as well. The issue we seem to have with that is, you know, although I would like to look at a seed guide or some kind of published field guide, when you look at the field guides, you get pictures of the plants that would look something like this. It's always in flower. And that made it a little more difficult to find if you were looking at the right plant when it's in seed. So here we have cardinal flower on the left and the great blue lobelia on the right. How do I tell which one I picked? And or even how do I find them? So I started taking pictures of the plants when they were in seed like this, and just to have some kind of a recollection of what they looked like when we wanted to go and collect them for seed. And since we were working in the seed nursery, I also started taking pictures of the seed itself. And in some discussions with Kelly, we were talking about, well, okay, I'm taking all these pictures. How is anybody going to see them? And we were thinking about what we could do to either, make prints in the nursery or things like that. But right about that time, the Field Museum had announced that they were creating these color guides, and Kelly told me about them. So I went and looked at them and saw that they had a template that could show you how to create them. And we started thinking about how we could put something together. So we decided on a little bit different from what we saw in the existing field guides in there, but we selected a set so that we could have 3 pictures for each plant, usually a general plant picture, some kind of a detail picture, and a picture of the seed. Now, we started working on that in 2017 and then promptly got scooped. This picture was by Isa Rudlinsky that put them on the field guides at the Field Museum in 2017. And she has some great pictures in there. So if you're interested in looking at more of those, there's also a on-demand talk by Alicia Diaz about the field guides. It could tell you where to find them. And our seed guides are in there now too. They're filed by numbers. Our seed guide numbers are 1271 to 1282. When we were taking the pictures for these, we wanted to get some close-up details to help ID the plants. Again, we have the cardinal flower and the great blue lobelia here. The great blue lobelia is on the right. The flora of the Chicago region talks about the auricles that stick out from the sinuses between the calyx lobes. When I'm reading stuff like that, it's hard to remember it in the field. So I really wanted to try to get pictures of those kind of things to show to people. So there you have it on the picture that'll be in the great blue lobelia shot for the seed guides. Now, to get pictures like this, it was pretty tough when, well, I would am I gone? Oh, there we go.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, good. When I was trying to get a close-up like this, I would always use a tripod for my camera. But even so, the wind would be blowing and it's hard to get a good close-up shot. But I wanted live shots because I wanted them to look like you would look at them in the field. And I thought about, I had an old tripod. I thought if I could put a clamp on my old tripod to help hold on to the plant, that would help hold them still. My brother has a 3D printer. I talked to him about it, and he said, send me a sketch of what you want. So I did. I sent him something based on a clothespin, a T-nut connector, so I could put it on the quick release of my tripod. And he printed me up a clamp. So I've been using this clamp. It works really great for holding on to things, keeping them still. But after 4 years of taking these pictures, I didn't have any pictures of the clamp. I wanted to show it to you, so I had to go out in the snow and do it. For the seed shots, I have what they call a copy stand. It's mainly for taking pictures of pictures. But it was ideal in that I could just put seed on a scale of some kind, and I could move the camera up and down to get the shot I wanted at the right scale. And they'd always be in really good sharp focus that way. In the field, I realized, or actually Kelly sort of pointed out, it'd be good to get an idea of the scale of the pictures in the field as well. Just putting a ruler out there was really unwieldy and hard to hold still. This is a shot actually of a seedling in the seed nursery, Harry Sweet Cicely, that was growing there. I needed a better method of doing that, but Photoshop lets you draw lines on things, and it also has a feature where if you can say what the scale is at the point of focus of your shot, it'll create a scale marker for you. So this is a leaf of Physostegia speciosa. Flora of the Chicago region says they would be wider than 2.3 centimeters, so the larger leaves. The teeth would be deeper than 2 millimeters. I wanted to be able to put that kind of a mark on my pictures and have it be reasonably accurate. I could just draw the line and say, well, that's what 2.3 centimeters is. But I wanted there to be something that was based on an actual measurement, so I didn't get it wrong. So I looked at my pictures for taking the seed shots. Here I have my camera set up to take a picture of a seed as close as I could get to the surface and still get the camera to focus. Then the width of the picture is 16 millimeters, and I know how many pixels that is. So I could if I could just take that and then back the camera up some, I could figure out how many pixels there were across the image as a function of the distance from my lens to the point of focus. So I did that. I plotted the data and got a curve plotting what I want to put into Photoshop, which is the scale in pixels per centimeter. And I used Excel to make a curve fit, tell me what was going on there, which worked pretty well. It didn't, at the very close area, if I tried to use those data points, it would just really mess up the curve fit. So I left them out initially. And also I looked at the formula that Excel was telling me it was using. And I realized that if I was just plotting things wrong here, if I plotted instead of plotting pixels per centimeter, if I plotted centimeters per pixel, it'd be very close to a straight line. So I was able to get myself a little equation there, very simple, to come up with a scale factor as a function of the distance from my lens to the focal point. I actually ended up using two different lines. I used a different line for the very close shots, and that by using those two different lines, I could always be within about 2% of the actual resolution on my picture. So then when I put that scale factor into the Photoshop tool, it could give me a scale marker. And if I said asked for one, it was 3 millimeters long, it would be about 3 millimeters long on my image. Photoshop also lets you do some really easy graphics images. So I could make a centimeter marker. And I created a few of those for putting on our pictures. So the result of that is I can easily, as long as I remember to get the measurement from the end of my lens to the focus point in my picture, I can get the scale at that point. And so then this is Physostegia virginiana, where the widest leaves are less than 2.3 centimeters, and corollas are less than 2.4 centimeters. Teeth are less than 2 millimeters. You could look at Physostegia primorsa, the prairie obedient plant, where the leaves are even narrower and teeth shallower. Works pretty good. So when we started doing this, about in 2017, first I started taking pictures in the nursery because they were very handy. The nursery bed, I had the species there with a name clearly labeled by Kelly, and they were easy to find. After a while, we started wanting to get more stuff from restoration sites or remnant sites, and the naturalists in Lake County use a GIS system where they plot things when they find them, and so they could put in the coordinates, and somebody else could go back there later to get seed. So I got Kelly to start giving me some coordinates. And the first time I did that was for Canadian milk vetch. She gave me the coordinates, and I put them in, and Google Maps showed me Antarctica. And I had to think there, was that because Kelly was on about her 100th caption that she was trying to write and wanted to send me to Antarctica, or did I screw something up? I figured out that her GIS system gives you the coordinates in longitude and latitude, and Google Maps wants latitude and longitude. Once I got that straightened out, it worked pretty well. Another issue with Google Maps is if you use its search function and you want to find a place, say in a forest preserve, if you're just using coordinates, when you're outside the preserve, it will just search for the preserve and tell you some point in the middle of the preserve. But if you wait until you're actually inside the preserve and put in the coordinates, then it'll tell you the waypoint that somebody was trying to give you. I found that it was most useful actually by just the way I did it the first time with this Canada milk vetch, I got on a point of the trail where I could identify it from Kelly's map that she texted to me, and get a heading towards where the plant was, and then just put my phone in my pocket and head in that direction and look for the plant. For this guy, I walked right to it, and that was the only one there on that slight hillside. And I almost think it's better when you're trying to do it that way to have a look from a distance off, get a heading, and go towards it rather than trying to follow Google Maps where it's pointing when you get closer, because they're never, it might be like within 100 feet, but it's never the same place exactly. But my theory is that if you are walking to it from a ways away, you tend to follow the same path that the person who made the waypoint followed, by going around brambles or down trees and stuff, and you end up finding the spot a little more easily. There are a couple times I had to walk around quite a bit to still find the spot, but usually it was surprising how close you could get. So we put together our set of seed guides and decided that we would have to divide them up somewhat, so that initially when we started putting them out, we were going to email them to people, and they would have been too big of files. After a while, we stuck with a division where we came up with 12 guides. And now the guides are on the Lake County Forest Preserve District webpage. You can go to lcfpd.org. There's a Get Involved tab. And under that, there's a menu off to the left for volunteering. And then you'll see these volunteer resources tab that will give you the links to the seed guide files. And these are all PDFs you can download. There are 12 guides and an index. And now we're getting to where we're almost 500 species shown in the guides. So it's coming along. So I'm going to hand this over to Kelly now and have her talk about the seeds and seed collection.
Thanks, Dale. So as you guys heard, Dale's put in a ton of hours, a lot of love on the chat for Dale. You'll have to check that out. Everybody really appreciating your engineering mind that you put to this work and all these really high quality pictures that you took. So I'm really passionate about seed collecting. And one of the things I love about seed collecting is how it connects to the heart of why we care about conservation, that we get into this work because we care about life and nature and diversity. And then we spend most of the year killing things. So seed collection is one of the activities we have that helps us reconnect with what we love. And that's bringing the life back into these wonderful places. And I think that's really important to remember as we're trying to reinvigorate people who've been doing it for a while, but also welcoming in new people. We're always looking for ways to preach beyond our choir. How do we get more people to care about conservation? And this is one of the activities we have that can really do that. Like if you've ever seen somebody who has that epiphany of, I'm holding an acorn and this is going to grow into that beautiful, majestic oak tree, that's the connection I'm talking about. So use seed collecting as a way to excite people about conservation. A lot of what we're doing is managing our invasive species, and that's critical work. We really have to do that. We have to get rid of these bullies so that there's a room that the ecosystem can get back into balance and have room for these rich diversity of native species that we want to have. But if all you're doing is killing buckthorn, you're not actually doing restoration. You're doing a step in the process, but make sure at some point you're bringing the life back into your work and you're looking at what seeds to bring back. Maybe that's a ton of species that are missing because you're starting from scratch. Maybe that's an area that just needs a little selective support, that you're collecting local seeds to selectively sow into these areas and help these populations rebound after they've been suppressed for so long, but bring back the life. I also really like seed collecting because it's a very accessible activity. I've worked with people ages 6 to 86. I worked with people of different abilities. I mean, I'm not taking everybody scrambling up and down ravine slopes. I'm not taking everybody to collect endangered species, but there's things you can collect without ever leaving a trail. I mean, think of the places where you can stand there and collect those soft seeds of Indian grass or crumble up the gray-headed coneflower in your hands, or the really bold eye-catching species like the bright red berries of Solomon seal or acorns. These are things that a lot of people can participate in and support our work that we're doing. So the barrier to seed collection is usually not the physical act of collection. You don't have to be chainsaw strong to do this. The barrier is usually in identifying the seeds, that you're staring at these fields of brown dried up things and it's hard to tell them apart. And that's where we hope these seed guides can help you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll take a look at these guides. So what you'll find in the guides are Dale's amazing photographs. And right up front, at the start of every species, you'll see the names, the common name, the scientific name, and the plant family name. And these names that we used came from the Flora of the Chicago region. If you're not familiar with this book, this is the Plant Bible. This is the resource for the Chicago region. It includes every single species and lots of information, associated plants, associated insects and fungus, and just lots of great information in there. So those are the names we used. There's been a lot of changes with the scientific names as we get more DNA evidence that helps us resort how things are related or not. But this is the reference we used. If you don't have access to this book, you can also go to the USDA plants website. You can type in species, and then when you pull it up, if it's ever been called anything else ever, there'll be a synonyms tab, and it'll tell you all those other names. So this is a free resource you can turn to if you don't have the flora. You'll also see there's a wetland tab. Again, our reference was the flora, so everything that was in those two wettest categories, the obligate wetland and facultative wetland, that's what ended up in our wetland guides. But you can also look at the USDA plants website as well. So going back to here, you'll also see that there are photo dates here. So huge kudos to Dale for his meticulous note taking to write down the photo dates so you have a sense of when you might collect these seeds. Now, people ask all the time, so when do I go to harvest this? And I have to say, well, it depends. And I know that's frustrating, but here's why that depends. If this species starts to ripen in Barrington, the southern part of Lake County, if I want to collect this species growing in Grays Lake in the center of Lake County, that's going to be a week or two behind. And the state line will be another week or two behind that. So you're looking at a 2 to 4 week span just in our one little county. We also have lake effect, which is not just an effect on people, but it affects the growing season. It affects the conditions when things are trying to bloom. It affects the insects that are trying to pollinate. It affects the seeds ripening. So that's pretty significant on your timing of these seed collection. And no matter where you are, you're going to have microhabitat effects that if you have a population that's growing in full sun and into part shade, the full sun part of that population is going to ripen a little faster than what's in the shade. And that's not even looking at the more complex questions of what's your genotype? Is this a local remnant population that's been adapted to this spot? Or is this something we introduced through seed or plant material and the nursery source was from Minnesota or Missouri? And how about climate change? How is that messing with our season this year? As you guys know, it's not simply turning up the thermostat, it is an increase in these severe weather patterns. So we can have years where spring comes a little early, things are warm, our schedule is ahead, and then all of a sudden it cools off, starts raining, things slow down, and maybe we get back to normal schedule. Then maybe late summer we have a drought, and so all the seed that was starting to ripen fizzles out because they don't have enough moisture to finish that ripening process. This stuff happens every year. So the best thing is to get a sense of when it might roughly be ready in your area, but get out there and check your site. Or talk to people who are within 20, 30-minute drive of where you're at so you can kind of get a sense of how things might be coming your way. But the photo dates can help with that too. And then of course, you'll also see these images of what does the seed look like? What is that processed final product going to look like for you? And so Dale took it against the millimeter rulers. And you'll also see pictures of the seed pods, and you'll see his copy table in the background with that 1-inch grid. You'll also see these images of the seed pods, and where is that located on the actual plant? Is it above the plant, on the side, underneath? So you'll be able to see that in all of these images that he took. So this is our first guide of the year, Spring Woodland Forbs. And these are seeds you might collect in May and June and a little bit in July. So I took a little artistic license calling these spring. But what these have in common is it's all your spring blooming species. These are all seeds that ripen with a pretty short window of time. They're also seeds you need to sow fresh. So this is actually some of our more challenging seeds to collect. If you collect any of these, give yourself a gold star for successfully getting your hands on the seed. This is a tough group to work with. You'll also notice that some of these have this do not collect symbol. We did include some weeds because people often ask or may incorrectly collect some of these species. So we wanted to incorporate that into the guides as well. So our second guide of the year are your summer prairie forbs, including some more weeds. Summer prairie, this includes kind of mostly June, July, August species in here. Then we've got summer woodland forbs. So this picks up where the first guide left off. So a lot of July and August primarily in this particular guide. And then we have summer wetland forbs. So this is May, June, July in this group. We also have some guides devoted to grasses and kin. So in here, these are some of the species that people get frustrated with because they look really similar, which can make them tough to identify. The good news about grasses, sedges, and rushes is that any field guide that covers these species is essentially a seed identification guide because you can't identify most of these without their seeds. And then we also included an introductory page on all of these grasses and kin to help you figure out, are you dealing with a grass, a sedge, or a rush? So maybe you've heard that wonderful saying that sedges have edges, rushes are round, and grasses are straws with holes to the ground. So that's the quick and dirty way to identify which species or which family rather you're looking at. But you can read up on these different characteristics as well to get more familiar with these different species. And then going through this guide, because the details, the dichotomous keys in your field guides are very nuanced for these species, and knowing that the field guides will include any pictures or drawings of these species and their seeds already, I decided to not try and replicate that. Instead, the captions focus on some of the characteristics that might stand out, or it might point you in the direction of what characteristics you'll want to look at to confirm your identification. So don't use this as your only resource when you're looking at grasses, sedges, and rushes, but hopefully it'll be a kind of a quick and dirty version of what you might be looking for. We also have a summer wetland grasses and kin guide because there's a lot of sedges that are ripe in the summertime. I have stewards telling me, well, there's nothing to do in the summertime with volunteers who don't have an herbicide license. And I say, aha, there's all sorts of great seeds you can be collecting. I mean, we've looked at, this is the 6th guide already. These are all sorts of things you can collect before fall hits. And another thing I like to do with wetland sedges in particular, at least for our agency, a lot of what we're trying to do in wetlands is beat back the reed canary grass. And we're seeing really good results if we use Intensity, that grass-specific herbicide that you can use in seasonally dry wetlands or upland areas. And then we need wetland competition. And sedges aren't harmed by grass-specific herbicides. So sometimes I'll go out with volunteers, and rather than taking the time to key out every single carex, because there's a lot of them, I might just grab a few samples and say, okay, so here's a half a dozen species. We're looking to do things, sedges have edges, these types of species, or even here, take this sample with you and fill your bag with this. With sedges, 99% of the sedges found in Chicagoland are native. So you really can't go wrong. So while I generally like to do species-specific mixes so that the ecologists can really customize what they want for each project, for wetlands, it's usually better time just to do a wetland sedge mix. Moving into fall, again, we have prairie, woodland, wetland. Most of these guides, by the way, are sorted by photo dates within the seasonal heading, but we did have some where we moved them around. We had some debates on this. There's times when I wanted to show you the sisters side by side. So you might see some photo dates that are drastically different, which might be part of how you tell them apart. It could also be that these are mama's boys and the seeds are going to hang on for a few months. So the photo date isn't quite as definitive for some of these species. But generally you'll see them organized by photo date, so you can kind of plan out how you want to collect things. So fall is typically September, October, and beyond in here. Here's our fall woodland forbs. Forbs are your flowering herbs or flowering plants, by the way. And I'm saying September, October, and beyond because you can collect some of these seeds today. I looked in my yard. I still have seeds of bergamots. I still have seeds of penstemon. There's thimbleweed seeds out there. So if you feel like collecting when it's -9, you can find some seeds somewhere. You won't get a ton of quantity though. We usually wrap up kind of middle of November is usually the end of our seed collection season. And then here's a brief look at our fall wetland forbs. So you can see again, September, October, and beyond. And then we also have some specialty guides for fall. So asters and goldenrods. A lot of people hate on asters and goldenrods because they think they're boring, which what they really mean to say is they're hard to identify. So to help you guys with that, and one of the extra wrinkles is that they're no longer in the aster genus anymore. Again, with DNA, they realized that the original aster that was first identified is an old world species, and surprise, surprise, us in the new world, our asters are genetically distinct from that genus. So the old world species gets to keep it since it was the first named that. And ours have been split into all these new genera. And if you're like me, your brain gets full. It's hard to remember this stuff. So we took the time to break it out into each genus. So you can say, aha, Eurybia, that genus is the asters with heart-shaped leaves and flat-topped or umbrella-shaped arrangements. And this group, this guide is organized by name rather than photo date. So you can look down and say, oh, there's the Eurybia side by side to hopefully help you learn these new names. Also because most of these asters, they're pretty much all ripening at the same time. And one of the things I love about asters is it's food. It is late season food. Those monarchs that are making that amazing trip from Canada down to Mexico, they need to fuel up for that. And like one of the latest blooming species in our nursery is the aromatic aster. And so we have a bed just full of that. And it's, you know, you go out there late fall, a warm sunny day, and it is fluttering with wings. All sorts of butterfly species, bumblebees, honeybees, different beetles and things on there. So this is really important food. Here's our aromatic aster. It's a really great food for our insects. So don't hate on the asters and goldenrods. And then here's our fall grasses and kin. And this includes more sedges, of course. And also you'll find a lot of our quintessential grasses in here as well, including our state grasses in here somewhere. Big blue stem. There it is, our state grass. And then last but not least, we also did a woody guide. So again, these species are not all in the fall, but most of them are fall ripening, and not a ton of people are collecting from woody species. So we decided to put this as its own guide for those of you that are interested in learning more about trees, shrubs, and vines. We also have an index. And again, thanks to Dale's meticulous work, his engineering mind, this is sorted 3 different ways. So don't hit print on any of these guides before you check the size of the file. This one is 39 pages because the first third of it is sorted by the scientific name. And then when we jump down to the middle, you'll see it is sorted by the common name. And notice that it is agrimony, comma, anemone, comma. So this can help you figure out what you're looking for. And also when you have that moment when you're going, oh, is it wild ginger, common ginger? Just look for ginger and you'll find it in the common name section. And then the last third of the guide is sorted by photo date. So you can use this to help plan out your collection efforts. Especially those early ripening species, that's going to be pretty spot on for order of collection. The later season species that hang on longer, you'll see a little bit more flexibility because it might be ripe for 3 months, you might have to collect it. So now I want to go back and jump into some of the terminology. One of the most important things is what's in this box, and that is to use your power for good, not for evil. Make sure you are collecting ethically and sustainably. That means that everything in the forest preserves is protected, including our seeds. So you can't just go and take things. And we find people all the time that are collecting berries and stuff. And most people do it out of ignorance. But some people will tell us, well, but there's so much. What's the big deal? The big deal is that we have staff and volunteers collecting all the time. And no matter how much we collect, honestly, we could always use more seed with all the projects we have going on. So if you want to join our programs, join our stewardship work days, join our native seed nursery work days. We'd love to have you. But we need a lot of seed with all the work we're doing. The other thing to keep in mind is what's left in conservation. That our district, we're the second biggest forest preserve district. We have 31,000 acres of land. It is a lot. It's a lot of work. A huge shout out to all the volunteers and partners and staff and contractors that are working their butts off to make these properties as great as they are. But 31,000 acres of land is about 11% of the county. That means about 90% of the county is no longer habitat for these plants and animals. Think how you'd feel if you lost 90% of your freedom. Kind of like being stuck in quarantine. It's really hard to thrive when your world has shrunk that much. And that's what our native plants and animals are dealing with every day. Now, I'm painting with a broad brush, of course. We have many wonderful partners and other conservation landholders in the county. But I will also be the first to say that not every square inch of Lake County Forest Preserves is pristine habitat yet. So don't go poaching seeds. If you get permission from the landowner to collect, you still want to make sure you're doing that with sustainability in mind. So our rule is the 50-50. So that could mean you walk up to a population, you collect from every other seed head. It could be that you say, all right, I'm going to collect the first 5 feet and I'll skip the next 5 feet. Or you could collect 100% if you harvest all the seed and then commit to sowing 50% before you leave that day. And that can be a really good technique if there's any chance somebody else might come through the same area collecting seed next week. Now, the 50-50 rule is for perennials. But the good news is that pretty much everything you're collecting is perennial. But most groups, that's all they end up collecting. Most of our common species are perennials. But if you know or suspect you're dealing with an annual or biennial, those are life forms that need a lot more seed. So we suggest collecting only 10% of the seed in that case. Same thing if you're dealing with rare, threatened, or endangered species. They're rare for a reason. Please don't stress out those populations anymore. So again, just 10% of the seed. The other thing you'll notice right above that are some guidelines on when to sow your seed. So anything you collect early in the year before about mid-June, you have to sow right away, like same day if you can. And that's a big ask. We have a lot of things going on in May and June. But once we get into the seed groups, you'll hear about how that happens naturally. So anything before mid-June, try to sow it within a few days if you can. Late June seeds are a little bit more forgiving. You need to sow them soonish, but you can usually hold on to them for 2 or 3 weeks and give yourself a little bit more wiggle room on when to sow them. Stuff you're collecting July and later, generally this is the stuff you can hold on to for a long time to make your really big complex mixes of 100 species that you're going to sow. And I recommend sowing everything by January 1st for best results. Most native seeds need cold stratification, meaning cold below 40 degrees, damp conditions. And there's a lot of species that do better with 90 days of stratification, especially some of those sedges. So if you're doing a complex mix, I suggest getting it in the ground by January 1st. All right, let's take a look at these seed groups. So the first page, you'll see these time-sensitive groups. These are the types of seeds that are scattered quickly. So if you want to collect them, you're going to need to monitor these populations often so you don't miss the seeds. And our first group are the elaiosomes. Elaiosomes is a fancy word for ant candy. And so here, this is an image of bloodroot seeds. And you see how it looks like there's a white gummy worm on the seed? That's the elaisome. It's literally lipids. It's a fatty, delicious dessert that these seeds have grown to attract ants. So once these seeds fall on the ground, ants sense this, they come running out, pick up these delicious elaiosomes, they run back, they rip off the candy, and then toss the candy wrapper into their trash. So the ants get dessert out of this arrangement. The seeds get picked up incredibly quickly. They're tucked away from other potential seed predators. They're carried off by an insect that's really strong. And then they're deposited into ant trash, which is this wonderful organic compost, really great seed starting material. So what this means for you as a collector is if you have a species and it says elaisome in the caption, This is one you need to be monitoring often. Like if I see bloodroot, once I see one pod has opened, I'm going to go around and give all the pods a gentle little squeeze to see if they pop. You want to be really gentle. If you're too forceful, you'll see the seeds aren't quite the right color, and you might not have as good germination then. But it's usually, bloodroot's usually a couple of weeks. Some of the other ones like twin leaf, it's usually within about 3 days that all the seed drops. But you want to collect it quickly. Once it's on the ground, the ants are going to get it before you do. And you also have to sow them right away, because these are seeds that can't handle drying out. They're used to being sown. It's a lot of our early woodland species, so they're used to a little shade, a little humidity, and being sown right away. So don't delay on getting these sown. Our next time-sensitive group are the ballistic seeds. And these are plants that have said, you know what would be the best way to get my kids out of the house? I'm going to catapult them. And so I have a very awesome video to share with you guys of these exploding to the 18th world over here. So those are native violets. Exactly what our violet species do. That is a sister species of jewelweed, also called hudson knot, because a droplet of water can each line. That is a species not native to the U.S. called exploding cucumber. But look at the power of these seeds. So that's the ballistic seeds. As you saw, there's a lot of power in ballistic seeds. They often are flinging their seeds 20 or 30 feet away from mama. So you're not going to stand there and catch these seeds when they pop. The best way to deal with these seeds, there's two methods. One is to learn the sequence of events, that usually these pods are going to go through a significant physical change or color change to let you know that she's going to blow. So like those violets you saw, they look kind of like octopus arms with the seeds on them. Before they open up, it's a closed pod. And the pod starts out nodding, pointing to the ground. And then when it starts to ripen, it'll raise its head up to the sky. Then it splits open into those 3 fingers of the octopus arms and pops the seed. So for that species, you can collect it when the pod is facing up to the sun. And then put it into a paper or mesh bag. Make sure you close up that bag with a clothespin or something. Otherwise, you'll have seeds all over the floor when you come back the next morning. But that's a good way to deal with those. The other option is to cover these plants with a mesh hood. I like to use no-see-um mesh. It's a nice tight weave. And so you tie it over the top of a plant, kind of like Halloween ghost decorations. Make sure that the plant has already been pollinated. So you want to see flowers that have wilted or immature seed pods on there. But you've tied it over the top of the plant. And that way, when the seeds pop, they're trapped in the head of that ghost that you've tied on there. And then you can come back and you have some time. Come back 2 or 3 weeks later, snip off the entire top of the plant, go inside out of the wind and untie it, and you can get your seeds out of there. Our next time-sensitive group are the fluffy seeds. So, this is asters, goldenrods, blazing stars, Joe Pyeweed. It's a lot of species, especially in the composite group. So with fluffy seeds, I have another video to share with you of dandelions. Not that you want to collect these, but it shows how seeds ripen. So they open up, all the fluff is forming, and then it flows away. So a cheater's tip when you're dealing with fluffy seeds is you don't want to collect it when it's yellow, obviously, but when it's in this stage, when it's closed up, you don't see any of the colorful bits left. And it's closed, but you can see that the tips of the fluff there, you can collect it at this stage and snip the stem, put it in a paper bag, and it will finish ripening. And ideally with fluffy seeds, you want to collect them when they're fully poofed out. But the reality is we only have so much time. And the reality of asters and species like that is you often have a multi-branch stem. So some of them are fully poofed, some have already blown away, some are still tightly closed. So you just kind of have to pick a spot. Unless you want to go and individually pluck little seed heads, I've done this with all sorts of fluffy seeds where I just look for things where the colorful parts are gone, snip the stem, and I've had decent germination with that. Milkweeds are a kind of a subset of the fluffy group. The difference with these, of course, is that they're contained within a pod, so you still have fluff attached to the seed. With these guys, don't get distracted by the pod color. You'll see that the pods can get kind of a blush color as the season goes on. That's telling you more about the seasonal conditions than the seed itself. There's often a correlation because seeds are ripening as the season goes on too, but really what you want to see is the pod splitting open. So a pro tip you can use on this is to put a rubber band around the pod before it's fully ripe. That way when it pops, it can't fully open up and release the seeds. And then our last time-sensitive group are your berries. So berries are really bold in color, so there's a really clear color change when they're ripe. And that's because these want to be noticed. It's a big Vegas neon sign saying, "Come eat me, I'm delicious," and then fly or run away and deposit my children miles from here. So everything else we've looked at so far, it's, shades of brown and beige and whites and just trying to blend it and, not draw attention to the babies. Berries are a different matter. And some of them are very time sensitive. Like this image here is Amelanchier, one of the service berries, June berries. These are very time sensitive because they're delicious. Lots of things love to eat them. So if you want to collect a lot of our native berries, you're going to have to be keeping a close eye on it or even covering them with a mesh wrap to keep things from eating it. I had that issue trying to grow one of the ribes, the gooseberry species. It's the prickly gooseberry, and it has prickly seeds. Looks like a medieval mace. And I thought, oh, that's not going to be eaten right away. I was wrong. So I had to cover branches of berries with mesh to keep them on the plant so I could collect them and grow them. Some other berries, like buckthorn, you'll still find out right now because the birds don't really like to eat them because they know that's going to give me the runs. Why would I want to eat that? So with berries, these exist to be delicious, and the seeds have to be chewed. They go through digestion and stomach acid before they're finally deposited into a steaming pile of fertilizer. So that's a pretty aggressive process that the seeds go through. And germination at any point in time before it's finally deposited would be very bad for these seeds. So there's usually some barriers to keep it from germinating too early. Oftentimes the fruit itself has a chemical inhibitor that's saying, don't germinate, we're still delicious. So you have to remove all the fruitiness before it's going to germinate. The other thing that's often the case is the seed inside usually has a really thick coat, which is naturally worn down by chewing and digestion, not cracked open, but just worn down enough that by the time it's deposited, water can start to penetrate through to the embryo, and that's part of what stimulates germination. So for seed collectors, one of the things you have to know is, well, you might have to beat the animals to get your hands on the seed, and you have to decide how you feel about taking that away from wildlife, because of course we want them to eat too. But you also have to do some pretty significant processing. So one technique you can use is to ferment them, where you put these into a cup of water and let them rot. It's kind of a stinky, messy process, but it works, and it breaks down the fruit and eats away at the seed coat, and then you do your cold stratification after that. The other way you can do it is to do a dull blender technique. So go to Goodwill, buy yourself a cheap blender, and I usually coat the blades in Plasti-Dip, which is a rubbery coating you can buy at any hardware store. And that way it's more of a beating action rather than a cutting action. And then usually it's like 1 part berries, 2 parts water, pulse it for about 10 seconds, and you'll see the fruit and the skins will float to the top, and your seeds are at the bottom. So you can just decant off the top, give it a quick rinse, and then put it into your stratification. The final thing to remember is that there's nothing about that natural process that is a dry one. So these are seeds that you don't want to fully dry out. They don't need to be sitting in water constantly, but they need some level of humidity. So if you're going to store these after they've been processed and you've taken away that juicy fruit, then you want to put them in a plastic container in the refrigerator or the freezer, and you'll see a little condensation in there, and that's exactly what you want. And any reputable nursery you buy from will send it to you and tell you, refrigerator freeze this seed. All right, so on this next page, we have the mama's boys. So these are the seeds that are going to hang on with mama for a long time, and they could be some of the best ones as you're trying to plan out your workday schedules. If you have a once a month workday and you're wondering what's going to be here next month, these guys will probably still be here next month. So some of these species, it's the exact seed is there for that long. Other species, it just makes a ton of seed over time. So seed number 1 might be long gone, but seed number 87 is forming a month from now. So mama's boy is a little bit of a generic term for the plant having some seed for you to collect. So our first group of mama's boys are the shakers. So these are things where you have an open capsule, and then as the wind blows or an animal walks by or 2 feet of snow comes and flattens it down, the seeds are shaken out. So think of things like wild bergamot with the open tubes and the seeds sitting in there. That's a shaker. Or this image here, this is Campanula, the American bellflower. And so it has open pores in it like a salt shaker and shakes out your seeds. Another subset of the shakers are the beaks. And so it's kind of the same idea, but you're waiting for the capsule to actually open up. So think about things like turtlehead, penstemon, shooting star is another great example. So you're looking at a capsule, you want to see it open. Once it's open, the seed is fully ripe. The next mama's boy are the coneheads. And so in the conehead group, you'll have things like pale purple coneflower. And one of the things I love about coneheads is you look at it in flower, you imagine it without its colorful parts. Well, that's exactly what it looks like in seed. So it's not a huge physical transformation. This can be some of the best species to start with when you're first learning your seed identification, because it's not such a mental leap to figure out what this was in flower. And with the coneheads, it's usually a hard or spiky head, so you might need to do some significant processing to get to the seeds, but they'll be tucked inside that head. Another similar type are the crumbly coneheads. So these are cone or thimble shaped, but they literally crumble. So you're looking at, like, this here is the gray head, also known as yellow coneflower. So you'll see the heads crumbling, or you can just crumble it in your fingers, and that's when you know it's ripe, is when it's crumbling. Prairie clovers and thimbleweed are other examples of the crumbly conehead group. We also have shattering seeds. So the shattering seeds are kind of like crumbly coneheads. This is early meadow rue here. And so you can just do the touch test to see if it crumbles in your hands. The difference between this and the crumbly coneheads is, well, for one, they're not cone shaped, but the coneheads always have some kind of receptacle of like a cone shaped foundation that the seeds are attached to. These shattering seeds are just sitting there together. They're not really attached to anything beyond the stalk. So I recommend the touch test for all of these because, as you can see here, some of these don't turn colors, especially your early species. They're going to stay green, so they're camouflaged in. So you can't use color as an indicator. They start out green, they get plumper and turn more of a football shape as they ripen. But getting a sense of how plump your football needs to be, that's a subtle thing that only comes with a lot of time and a lot of staring at seeds, which you may or may not want to do. But the touch test is always a good way to do it. As some of our friends at SOM like to say, you just want to tickle the seed. And so if a little tickle is enough to send the seeds loose, then it's ripe and you can go ahead and collect them. Our grasses and kin are all shattering seeds. And then last but not least are the hitchhikers. So like here we have this Avon species, or things like tick trefoil, jump seed. All of these species, it's really easy to tell they're ripe because they're going to hitch a ride on your pants. Color can be an indicator, but not always. And if it's hitching a ride, then Mama Nature thinks it's a good time for the seed to be dispersed. So that's your best option to tell that it's ready. And then, of course, you'll see that do not collect symbol when you come across any of the weedy species. So I'm going to see if we have any questions here. See.
There's a question about Vernonia, Kelly, on,
yeah,
that's included in the fluffy group. And do you have to wait until they're actively being released, or can you pick them a little early and let them ripen in the bag?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The Vernonias in particular tend to be a little bit more closed than most of your other fluffy species. So those I do try to see. I want to see a little bit of the widening of. I want to see a little bit of a poof, but usually they're fairly closed up when you collect them. I don't remember if that's probably in our fall wetland forbs. Any other questions I should answer before we dive in to more species-specific questions?
It looked like they were pretty much well answered by other people in the chat, but there's also the question about, how small a population can you take seed from?
That's a very good question. So like with the seed banking program that they're doing at the Chicago Botanic Garden, which is part of the bigger Millennium Seed Bank Seeds of Success program, they're usually looking for at least 50 individuals before they're going to collect. So that's ideally what you want. If you're dealing with something that's rare, it depends on my confidence as to what our success might be. If it's a species I've grown before and I'm pretty certain that we can have some success to increase it by collecting it and growing it out, I might collect from smaller populations. But again, it's kind of that question of, how much harm are you causing to that mother population? So if there's only 10 plants, I'd be really hesitant to collect from it.
Barb Hill had a question a while ago about Spiranthes. How do you recommend handling and getting that germinated?
Yeah, so the orchids, very good question. The orchids are trickier to germinate because orchids need a specific fungus in order to germinate. Spiranthes aren't quite as finicky as other orchid species. But still, you don't see tons of Spiranthes moving around a lot. It's usually pretty localized. So you can work with an orchid grower. There's a really great, Dr. Zettler down at Illinois College has done a lot of amazing work with orchids. And so we've done some stuff with him where we've tried growing it on plates. And so he has different fungus that he has actually grown. And he's also done work with agar plates. But even with him, he said, if you get 20% germination, you're lucky. But more often you'll get none, and that just happens. If you're trying to do it in the field, I would suggest you collect some seed, but maybe also pinch some of the soil nearby and make sure that you have the seed and the soil together. So there's a chance of that inoculation happening with the seed and the soil together. The other thing about Spiranthes is they like some disturbance. So you want to be thoughtful, looking at places where they can have a little bit of disturbance. They'll probably have better success there, but it's tough to move those around and work with the orchids.
Well, there's a question about ditch stonecrop and how to tell if that's ripe.
Yes, I think I accidentally closed out my fall wetland forbs, so let me pull that back up again. Ditch stonecrop, here we go. So ditch stonecrop, it has this look kind of like octopus arms. So for these guys, as you can see, these are beaks. So they're actually, it's like tiny dust seed. Here's Dale's pictures against that millimeter ruler. So you can see how teeny tiny the seed is. It's like 0.5 millimeter long. So you want to look for some of these to split open. You can see how some of these are starting to split at the top. There's like 5 little capsules with each seed head. But you can also just kind of crumble them in your hands to see if they easily break apart. There's often kind of a pinkish or brown color to the capsule as they're starting to ripen. Whereas over here, you can see the range of colors that some of these in the background are more green, whereas these up in the foreground are more pink colored. So generally pink or beige.
Do the crumble test. Yeah, there's also general, maybe you could talk about seed storage.
Yeah, so seed storage. So let's see, how should we deal with this? Those kind of July and later species that you can hold on to for a while, ideally you're getting them out the same winter. But if you want to store them for longer, you can, but then you're going to want to have a climate controlled space. And the rule that people typically say is temperature, degrees Fahrenheit, plus percentage of relative humidity should be 100 or less. So you can have it 60 degrees, 40% humidity. You can have it 90 degrees and 10% humidity, but that equation should be 100 or less if you want to store your seed for a long time. And that will work for a lot of these July and later harvested species. It'll work really well for your common species. You can keep things for years that way. Those early things, you really should sow them as soon as you can. Like I messed around a little bit with bloodroot to see if I stored it in plastic in the refrigerator for a week, would I still have good viability? And it just seemed like that viability dropped really quickly. You know, one good way to tell that storage is tough is if the nurseries aren't selling it from seed, because the nurseries want to make a profit on this stuff too. So if they're not going to be selling you things like bloodroot, that's an indication of the challenges of storing that seed. But generally low temperature, low humidity if you're going to do long-term storage. There are some other exceptions like drop seed. You generally want to sow within 6 months. So you don't want to hold that one long-term, just a little finicky. And just a lot of those early spring species, you just got to sow sooner than later.
What about the milkweeds? How do those fall in the storage category?
Milkweeds seem to store pretty well. I mean, I haven't done a lot of the research. That would be a good question to maybe reach out to some of our friends at the Chicago Botanic Garden who have the long-term storage, but seems to be working out well for us. With Lake County Forest Preserve District, we tend to hold seeds for about a year, which gives us time to really plan out our complex mixes, also because of we're blending it in with purchase seed, and the timeline for doing big seed bids and the committee approval and all that stuff, we're generally looking at least a year out. So we tend to hold on to milkweeds for a while, and I've had good germination with that. The thing with milkweeds that I see people doing wrong more often is there's people who like to start it on fire to clean the seed. And, you know, they'll tell you, well, like it's fast and it's like a party trick and it, you know, burns off the fluff really easily. I tried doing that and I found that it killed every seed when I did that. And even the seeds that didn't look singed at all. And it was like, you know, less than 2 seconds of flame because it burns fast. But for me, that was a major seed killer. The other thing with milkweeds is that they need light to germinate generally, not always, but any of those fluffy seeds generally want to be sown on top of the surface. If you're burying it below the soil, you might not have good germination with all your fluffy seeds, including milkweeds.
Do they need cold stratification?
They do, yes. Almost pretty much that's my default setting for all species is cold stratification. The only species that don't tend to require it is most of the grasses don't care. But if you cold stratify them, they'll germinate a little faster. So it tends to be, if I stratify them because I want to put them in the greenhouse, I'm going to go ahead and stratify them. If I sow them fresh in the greenhouse without stratification, they take longer to germinate. But pretty much everything needs cold, moist stratification.
There's one from Jeff Weiss asking about if you put seed out in the winter and then burn in the spring, is that a bad idea in that spot or?
Possibly. What should happen in theory is that with the freeze-thaw cycles, that these seeds should be working their way down to the soil. But yeah, I've always been curious. It would be interesting to do some studies on that to see if we see different results with a spring burn after we've seeded. But yeah, generally the freeze-thaw cycles should move it down to the ground, so you should be okay.
Do you put baptisia seed in the freezer to kill the weevils?
Yes, the baptisia. You have these zombie weevils that eat all the seeds, and I call them zombies because freezing does not actually kill them, but it will send them into hibernation. So yes, if you're going to collect your baptisia seeds, you do want to. I put them in the freezer right away. It'll stop those weevils from eating all of your seeds. But if you pull that bag out of the freezer and let it sit on your counter, a couple hours later, they come back to life and start walking around. So yes, I keep them in the freezer until I get a chance to process the seed. And usually you can separate out the weevils pretty easily. Here, let me pull up. That would be a fall prairie forb somewhere. Oh, not in fall prairie forbs. Which guide do we have that one in, Dale? I forget.
Which were you going
the
for?
Baptisia?
Baptisia?
Would that be in?
Just a second.
Oh, here we go. It's in summer. So here's your pods. I thought here we go. There's even a picture of the weevil here against the ruler. So those are the weevils that infest a lot of our Baptisia. What happens is these weevils will lay their eggs in the flowers. And then after this seed pod forms, they hatch in there. And so all these baby weevils then have a field day feasting on all of our Baptisia seeds that we're trying to collect. So it's a localized issue. Either your preserve has them or it doesn't. There's not a gray area on this. But I also noticed that there's tons of Baptisia in the preserves. And if we didn't have weevils, it might become a weedy problem in some of our prairies. But if you're going to collect these, again, put them in the freezer. To process the pods, you can use a rolling pin. I've had kids dance on the pods to crush them up. And then you can sift out the seeds and the weevils by screen. And the weevils themselves are lighter than the seeds. So you can use a fan to blow the weevils away. Or if you have a seed column, one of those kind of processing machines, you can easily separate out the weevils from the seed. But if there's any weevils with your seed, put it back in the freezer until you're ready to get it out, because they will keep feasting on it.
How do you germinate porcupine grass?
Porcupine grass, that one we have in probably this one, I would guess. Porcupine grass, here we go. The porcupine grass has these super cool seeds, and you can see how twisty they are, that they have this ability to drill themselves into the earth. So you collect them, they'll be nice and dark against that pale calyx wrapped around the seed, or the glooms around the seed. So it's a really striking color change when they're ripe. You want to be careful not to stab yourself with these. They are very sharp and capable of drilling into the earth or your fingers. And it's the changing humidity is what helps these twist and curl and drill into the soil. So you want to make sure that if you collect these and you don't sow them right away, make sure you store them someplace with constant humidity, like your refrigerator. Otherwise, you'll have this big rat's nest of porcupine grass. So you can sow these a couple of ways. One is to go out and just, toss them out, seed point down into the earth, and then it'll twist itself in with the changing humidity that happens. Otherwise, you can remove the awns, and Dale actually made the suggestion of using a nail to make a hole so you can just tuck the actual seeds in if they're awnless, like you see in this upper picture. But yeah, don't forget about these. You'll be sorry if you forget them on the counter.
Do sedges need stratification?
They do. A lot of our sedges do best with a full 90 days of stratification. At least, bear in mind, I'm talking about Lake County seeds. So maybe some of the southern counties would do better with 60, but oftentimes 90 days of stratification is what you need for your sedges, both your woodland, your wetland, prairie sedges too.
What's the hardest seed for your volunteers to obtain?
There's a lot of tough seeds. Some of the tough ones are the really small stature species like yellow stargrass, because these things are about 6 inches tall, and you think it'll be easy to collect because you see it in bloom and like, oh, there's 100 of them right here, no big deal. And then when you come back and it's ripe, everything else is put on 2-3 feet of height above that 6 inches. So you're crawling around on your hands and knees looking for these tiny little green, tiny capsules that are tucked underneath. I even flagged some of them when they were in flower so we could go back and collect them. And still, I was working with our YCC, the Youth Conservation Corps kids. And so it's high school and college kids. And I'm like, so right by every flag, here's an example of what you're looking for. They're really tiny. Looks like a lot of them have flopped over. And there would be 5 kids around a flag, and they're like, there's nothing here. And I'd come through and go, oh, actually, it's, kind of tucked underneath things. So they can be really tough to find a lot of those short stature species. Some of the rare ones are tough too. Phlox is a challenge to collect. That's a ballistic one that tends to be one of the more expensive seeds to purchase. That not only is it ballistic, but it doesn't go through a physical change like the violets do. So I do the mesh hood, or I go out and selectively pick off as I see them ripening. And the seed viability isn't great on phlox either. A lot of times the nurseries are growing them from cuttings rather than from seed. which is, better than no flocks, but then it's asexual reproduction, so you're not getting the genetic diversity with those.
Is it too late to put down milkweed seed now?
You're kind of late. Yeah. Common milkweed, you could probably get away with, 30 to 45 days of stratification, but ideally you're looking for below 40 degrees at the soil level. And so with the way that the snow is melting, we could potentially be above 40 degrees in the next month. So I'd say maybe, but you might be better off doing an artificial stratification. So what we do for greenhouse work is we typically mix together moist sand, like sandcastle consistency, in a Ziploc bag with the seed. And then you could do your stratification and then sow that, sand and all, 60 days from now. And it wouldn't be really that much behind schedule, but you might have better luck doing that. Also keeping in mind spring burn schedules.
We talked about stratification for sedges, but a lot of the sedges are amongst these spring ripening plants. Would it not be better to just get those planted right away?
Yes. So everything in the spring woodland forbs you definitely need to sow right away. But as you'll see here, anything you're collecting before mid-June, you should do right away. And so pen sedge is a great example of that.
Yeah, it's going to be in grasses and kin.
Yeah, I was looking at the wetland grasses and kin. Look at the regular grasses and kin. Here we go. Pen sedge is one that people talk all the time about how this is really poor from seed. It's not actually poor from seed. You just have to sow it fresh in order to get viable seed. And certainly with pen sedge, because it likes to make that natural carpet, you can also do divisions of an existing population and dig up a little bit and move it away, assuming that that's appropriate for your landscape and your property that you're working with. Certainly digging up things is a little, you got to make sure everybody's on board with that. But that can be a way to kind of jumpstart another population. Maybe you're just moving it 30 feet away to start something new. But if you collect the seeds and sow them right away, you'll have good luck with pen sedge. So you'll notice in the caption here, like for this one, it says it must be sown fresh. Some of these other ones too, like Carex hortifolia, it's included in the caption as a reminder to sow fresh. But certainly any of these early species, get them in the ground right away.
I think you've answered all of the questions, Kelly.
Ah, you guys are so easy. I love it. Well, then I'll just close with a reminder of where you can find these guides. So you can go to our lcfpd.org/volunteer, this last pop out. You'll find all the guides for download. You can also go to the field guides page. Unfortunately, the latest update I was really slow in getting out. So these are the 2020 edition, but there's over 400 species in these, and you'll see the updated version very soon on the field guides. Again, my apologies that I was so tardy, but these are the most current versions here on our webpage. Let's see. Oh, have we grown puccoons from seed? Puccoons are tricky. I've had really good luck with the woodland puccoon. That one, you just sow it fresh and it does great. The prairie puccoons have been a lot finickier, and I think some of it with the puccoons has to do with the health of the genetic diversity of the population. Some sources we've had no luck, other populations we've had better luck. But again, try to do them fresh and see if you have better luck with them. The Baskin and Baskin book, Seeds, is really good too. You can learn a lot about the different types of dormancies, whether it's physical dormancy and how to break all that. False toad flax. So that's one of the parasitic species. We're still working on that one. We've had a lot of challenges with our parasitic species. There's indications for the natural parasites that you want to either sow them with the seed of the host plant, or that you actually want to damage the roots of the host plant, that maybe there's something exuded in the sap of that attracts the connection. It's not consistent with the parasites. Like the rope dodder, you don't need to do anything. You just toss it in and it does great. Toad flax, it's been really low quality success with growing that one. We've tried doing it fresh. We've tried sowing it with different host plants. We've tried doing rescues. It's been a little bit particular as with that one. And the Botanic Garden has been doing some research on that one, and still it seems to be low germination no matter what we try on that one. Do I get into sowing methods in the guides? Not too much, no. But generally for field sowing, I recommend doing broadcast seeding, whether that's by hand or with a broadcaster on the back of a tractor. The other method that we used to use back in the day when I first started in it was we were all excited about these Truax seed drills and kind of, taking back agricultural tools for the power of nature. The problem with those is that you need to seed it into the top like 1/4 inch of the soil, because a lot of these species do need light to germinate. As I mentioned, any of those fluffy seeds need to be light to germinate. Also, the general rule for native seeds is sow them as deep as they are wide. So as tiny as these seeds are, that's usually a 1/4 inch or less. So the seed guides or the seed drills didn't work out for every species. You had to have a very light touch for the operator doing it. And then the seeds that did germinate, you had these beautiful cornrows of prairie that persisted for a decade or more before the rest of it filled in. So broadcasting is the preferred method. You want to have decent soil contact. That will happen with the freeze-thaw cycles. But if you have the time and the manpower to rake things down to the dirt, that can improve that connection with the soil. The important thing is when those seeds germinate and those tiny little roots come out, you don't want to have them go too far before they can get some nutrients and some moisture. If they're on 6 inches of leaf litter, they're not going to make it before they run out of energy. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm glad you're enjoying it. If you guys have any further questions, my email address is on the guides. If you have questions for Dale, you can contact me and I'll forward that on, but that way we'll keep everything going to my work account rather than blowing up his personal email. So.
Thank you so much. That was phenomenal. I can't think of a better way to close our sort of celebration and stewardship day than with like a celebration of stewardship. It's just incredible. This presentation, we're recording it, so it will be available to attendees in the coming weeks. Combined with the guides and this great conversation is just amazing.